Hi, good to see you all. My name is Balder, and I'm here to talk about creativity and neurostimulation. So basically, I have two main topics I would like to talk about today, and my starting point for this is three different positions. So I work with a company called PlatoScience that I will show you some demos about, and we also do a workshop afterwards. Then the second company works with cognitive training, so we try to use these kind of informations to help people to be more creative. And the last thing I work with is classical science at the Technical University in Denmark. So a couple of words about my background. My background is first from medical equipment engineering, so I've been working with making a lot of hospital gear, right here, one for Coloplast. Then I went on and did a PhD on neuroscience, more specifically the neuroscience of creativity, working with understanding what happens in the brain when people are trying to be creative. Then lastly, we've been starting to work more with biohacking and seeing how you can actually trick the brain into working more creatively using electricity. So that's what the talk will be mainly about today. So what I have with me here on stage is a Neuro Stimulator. It's called Plato Work. You can see it's bigger on the slides. It's always dangerous to do live demos of tech gear, but let's see if that works. So just give me a second. And we're good. So I'll just leave this phone here just to keep an eye on my session. So what I'll talk about for the next couple of minutes is what is actually happening on my head right now. So I'm going to be focusing more on neurostimulation than I'll do on creativity. Humans have a more than 20,000 years experience in messing with our brains. We do that through pills, alcohol, rituals, smoking. And what I've found very interesting with this, the more we work with neurostimulation, is people have a very clear distinction between which type of messing with the brain that's okay, and that's everything from here and down. So if you put something through your ears, through your mouth, nose, it's fine. But as soon as we start putting something on the head, most people get very skeptical. And to understand why I find it so interesting to look at manipulating the brain directly, we have to look at how the brain works. And the simplest way of explaining what we do is the brain works on a chain reaction of chemicals leading to an electrical signal that leads to a new chemical reaction and so forth. And what we've been doing for all these years is messing with the chemicals. As you can see here, the electrical signals in our brains are very strong and they're very measurable. What you can see here is what we'll do in the workshop afterwards. You can see people playing around with some simple EEG toys that uses electrical signals coming out of the brain. The important thing to me with all of this is actually it's when you mess with the chemical system, you create imbalances in the brain that can be really hard for the brain to recreate. While when we mess with electricity, we actually make the brain better to do the same operation without stimuli. So every time our brain sends an electrical signal, that signal will actually have a better possibility to be used again. So to me, the fact that eating a pill, eating sugar, some of you probably had a cup of coffee this morning, is fine. Having something on the brain is not. The Egyptians started experimenting with neurostimulation about 3,000 years ago, where they used electrical eels and they placed them on the head of people with severe migraine. So already 3,000 years ago, we knew that the brain was electric, and we started to play around with it. Over the last 15 to 30 years, we've been a bit more specific. So the first distinction I'll talk about is the difference between invasive and non-invasive neurostimulation. So a lot of the technologies we see emerging now, you probably seen Elon Musk, he has his new startup, Neuralink, is based on going into the brain and then working with the signals directly in the brain. And then we have the non-invasive technologies, which are placed on the outside, which are easy to take off. And to me, working with consumer technology, I find the non-invasive way more interesting, because you don't need to place something in your brain that will be there for a very long time. The second distinction that is important to know is the difference between suggestive and forceful stimulation. So you can stimulate the brain in a way where you help it to do whatever it's trying to do, or you limit its ability to work, or you can force activity in certain regions. So two non-invasive technologies that we've been working with, one is TMS, which is transcranial magnetic stimulation, where you use magnets to create electrical fields that then forces activity, so that's a forceful. And then what I have on my head right now is TES, which is electrical stimulation, which uses a more suggestive technology. So very simply, I'll just see how I'm doing here. Okay, so we're good. So very simply, what the product does is it sends electrical current from one electrode through my brain and then picks it up in another electrode. So what it does, it creates an electrical current in my brain that then changes the brain's operation mode. There are three different main ways of sending electrical currents through the brain. One is as direct current, another is by random current, and the last one is by alternating current. What I just had on my head was direct current, so it's a one-way electrical stream going to the brain. This technology has been around for a little more than 15 years, and it's been used for a lot of very interesting studies. Four of my favorites, it's been used for training pilots, so they could decrease the training time for jet fighter pilots. It's been used for increasing accuracy for snipers. It's been used for treating long-term depression, and it's been used for stroke rehabilitation. And what we do with these kind of technologies is we look at a lot of different brain scans, our own and others, and we try to find a common denominator. So I'd say, based on all these studies, it seems that for this particular type of work, this particular type of cognitive work, we would like the brain to look like this. In our case, since we are working with creativity, what we've been looking for a lot of years is, could we find a good pattern in the brain that seems to be evoking creativity? And this is one of my colleagues, Morten Friis-Olvarius. One of his studies, one of the first ones that started looking at what we call the default network. So the default network is a part of the brain that's almost, or it's always active. So even when you're asleep, certain parts of your brain will be working. And what Morten found, and others have found later, was in most people, when you are concentrating on a task, you will have increased activity in the frontal lobe, and then you will decrease activity in this default network in the back of the head. Because what this part does is it's throwing things at you that you didn't ask for. So if some of you was thinking about dinner right now, that's from the default network. It's firing stuff at you that you didn't ask for. What Morten found was people who are scoring high on creativity tests, they have the opposite function. Meaning that when they sit down, they concentrate on a task, they get more activity in the frontal lobe, they actually increase activity in the default network. Meaning that their brains can concentrate and fire random stuff at them at the same time. Which makes a lot of sense for creativity because you have more material to work with that is a little more random than the information you actually request yourself. So in a use scenario with PlatoScience products, if you sit at work, you're stuck with a task, you really feel, I'm not in the right place for this work. I think we all have that feeling quite often. You know exactly where your brain should be, but it's just not there. Then you put the device on, you go on your phone, you pick which type of mindset do I like to have right now, and then the device starts sending currents trying to emulate how your brain should look like, helping you to get to the state that you know you could be, but that it might take a lot of hours to actually get there. Then this is the first question we always get, no way. this is not possible, how could we not know that we can manipulate the brain directly using electrical currents? The reason for it is the individual differences in all of this are huge. So if I take the same stimuli and give it to everyone in this room, you will not have the exact same output from that stimuli. So the next level of this technology that we are working with is an individual one, where using very simple brain scanners, you can use those to sort of improve the stimulation over time. So envision yourself, you have a very good morning, you put the device on, you record what does a good Monday morning look like in my brain? And if you do that a handful of times, in theory, you should be able to put the device back on at a later point in time and say, please bring back a good Monday morning. And this is where the technology really starts to get interesting in my point of view. Here's a very simple mock-up we did. It's a combination of a Neuro Stimulation device and an EEG device. So what we do right here is changing the currents based on the signals that my brain produces. The next level of this, where are we going with all of this work? To me, the most fascinating thing about neurostimulation is the possibility of making real brain-computer interfaces. So right now, as you also spoke about, whenever we are interacting with computers, it's through a lot of filters. We have all these different information filters that changes the type of information that we decide that our brain will get. What I think is a very interesting vision about the future is, what if my brain could request information from a computer directly? So if we could take the calculation power of AI and the creative powers of the human brain and let the two of them actually work together directly without all the layers of processing that we are working with right now. So instead of trying to make artificial intelligence creative, as some, maybe too few people are working with, I think it's more interesting to find ways of linking human creativity and artificial intelligence. If you're interested in any more about the project, here's a little information, a TED Talk, and an article about the type of research we do, which is more on the cognitive training realm. So thank you so much for listening.